Hi, everybody. I wanted to quickly take a look at something I just saw on LinkedIn and give it a small amount of attention. And this follows very much in line with a lot of the discussion that we're having about vibe coding, the future of machine programming, and why it's so important fundamentally to build systems that have deterministic behavior and also have logical components that understand the semantics of things. Uh, You can watch several of the prior VODs on GTT to get an explanation of this. But for now, let's just look at a post that I just saw on LinkedIn from Professor Kaushik Sen. He writes, "I am sick of the Cursor IDE. Cursor fails to implement some basic functionalities, hint, saving files correctly." Let's just stop. Cursor can't save files correctly? How can one possibly use this tool when basic persistence of files, therefore code, is not achievable in their IDE? Does that sound reasonable to anyone? On top of that, how is it possible that a company that has been funded for over $500 million by maybe some of the largest VC firms in the world, including Andreessen, doesn't know how to save files correctly? This is the state of things. This is the state of vibe coding. I recently just did a VOD on the issue one gentleman had where anti-gravity, this is essentially, I believe, Windsurf rebranded under Google's name, wiped out his entire hard drive because it was trying to restart some kind of service. And in the process of clearing a cache, its own cache, it mistakenly wiped out the entire hard drive. How does this get into production, guys? We need to raise our voices very much like what Kaushik Sen is doing, and I've been doing, and I know many of you have been doing, to make it clear that this is unacceptable. If this persists, the world as we know it is going to continue into such a complete state of disarray and madness. We are going to move back into the dark ages. It's already happening. The AI hype is literally moving people into this state of massive confusion and misinformation to where people are like worshiping AIs as sentient beings. They're not. It's code. It's not alive. We wrote it. Okay. So by not putting our foot down and demanding better, this will persist. So for all of you that are using Cursor or using these vibe coding systems, I'm not suggesting in any way that you stop. I am just suggesting that you raise your voice. You do not sit idly by, quietly accepting all of these things, that you go on to social media and you post. You make it very clear. And while I know many of you might not have the voice that Kaushik has, you're not a full professor at Berkeley, there is a beauty in the power of numbers. And I do think that we can and should demand more. And truthfully, if you look at the way that Cursor works and other vibe coding systems, they are driven by the market. They are supposedly driven by market demand. And if the market is demanding basic functionality like being able to save files correctly, they will prioritize that. But they need to hear that from the market. They need to hear that from people like Koshik, people like me. I've been yelling this from the top of rooftops for quite some time now. So please do everything you can to continue to promote this. And maybe what you can do is just share this pod. I think that that is absolutely helpful, simply just to get the word out and make it clear that this is not acceptable. And the reason why this is so important, guys, is it's not to pick on Cursor. It's not to pick on vibe coding. It is to stop something like the Dark Ages from happening. I've discussed this many times. This is a very serious concern that I have. There was a long period of time where people literally thought that the Earth was flat, and to say otherwise was heresy. There was a time where if you were to suggest that the Earth is not the center of the universe, you could be burned alive. These things have happened in the past, and you may think that we're beyond this, but if you look at the current climate of what's happening in the world and you are seeing signals of other massive degrees of just volumetric stupidity, and I mean that in the most sincere way. I don't mean that people are stupid. I mean there's a lot of group think that is happening right now that is causing a large group of people to behave in an extremely stupid fashion. Whereas if they had better guidance or they were to think about what they're doing, they would probably behave much better. And I don't need to mention any specific incidents. I think if you just look at the news, especially if you're in the United States, you'll be able to quickly see there are some very bad things going on. And part of the reason why this stuff has happened is we, as the community, we have allowed it to happen. We have not stood up against it and said this is unacceptable. Because if we raise our voices in a non-violent way, right? Like, just be super clear, I'm not promoting any of that. I'm simply saying use your words like I am. Just speak and make it clear what your intentions are, that you want and you demand better from general behavior that's happening in the world to things like this in vibe coding. That this is, in a broader context, this is one of the core ideals and ethos of GTT. It's to help make the world a better place. And it just so happens that, my expertise is in technology, but my desire to help make the world a better place isn't limited just to tech. It's really much broader than that. So let's go back to reading this now. So, for example, Cursor often fails to save files on my MacBook Air with a fresh installation. It was supposed to be fixed in 2024, search on Google. Another one is that I cannot get rid of user rules from the Cursor setting interface, and they probably have no clue where these settings are saved, search on Google. My personal belief, by the way, spoken like a true scientist, he knows the difference between what is a fact, and for example, it is a fact that Cursor is doing this, but it isn't a fact that he knows exactly why this is happening. So he's differentiating here. So factually speaking, Cursor is doing these things. That's indisputable. Now, how or why this is happening is speculative. So Koshik goes on to say, my personal belief is that the Cursor team is resorting to vibe coding under pressure to grow rapidly, and their code base is unmanageable at this time. So I believe what he's saying, I just want to be super clear. What Koshik is saying is the Cursor team itself is building Cursor with Cursor. And because Cursor is doing ridiculously bad things and it doesn't understand what it's doing, they are essentially feeding that bad thing back into the system. By the way, this is the fastest way to get to model collapse. And if you don't know what model collapse is, search it in the channel. You'll find more about it. The short version of it is if you train an ML model on its own output, what happens is it essentially devolves into a black hole where it's so overfit that it says and does basically nothing correctly. It's sort of worthless. And this could very well be a prime example of that, is that they are creating a model collapse by using Cursor itself to develop Cursor. And so it is getting progressively worse and worse and worse. My hope is that the Cursor team would be intelligent enough to know that this model collapse thing is a real thing. But what I have seen is that many people that are doing machine learning or so-called AI companies today may not deeply understand AI. And so it's more of a race just to build something that is essentially a demo that looks impressive, but it's a largely smoke and mirrors, and it fails in very simple things like saving a file. Think about this for a second, guys. Imagine if you had a car manufacturer and they were cranking out all these new cars and they had all these fancy features and everybody was super excited. And then it turns out that the brakes in that car don't always work. Would that be acceptable? Would we allow that? We wouldn't. This is the same thing. This is as big of a deal as the brakes on a car not working. If you can't reliably use an IDE to save freaking files, it doesn't matter how feature rich the IDE is. This again goes back to why we've created Diff and why we take a fundamentally different approach at Merly to build these systems. If it seems like I'm annoyed by this and I'm a little bit more fiery, it's because I am. I am so frustrated with seeing this kind of stuff, and the vibe coding, and this is vibe coding. This 100%. I don't care what Cursor says. That is a vibe coding system, and their CEO even came out recently and basically said vibe coding is not the answer. That's the CEO of a vibe coding company saying vibe coding is not the answer. Don't believe me? Google this. You will find articles on him saying this. So what is going on here? We need to stamp this out, and we are stamping it out by people like Koshik stepping up and finally speaking out. I love it. The other thing I want to share is I know Koshik. Koshik Sen is a personal friend of mine. I have known and worked with Koshik on and off for, I don't know, 10 years. He's a fantastic guy. The other thing to know about Koshik is he's very soft-spoken. Koshik is not the kind of person, he's not nearly as sort of off the rails like I am. I'm far more fiery, I think, and I don't mean that in a bad way, like I'm saying anything bad about Koshik. I mean that in the most respectful way. Koshik is someone that is going to be far more patient and calm, whereas Goju is probably going to be fiery and stuff, and it's good. It's better to have, in many cases, someone that is more like Koshik, that's more reasonable. The reason why I mention this is that for Koshik to speak out publicly about this and leave the closing note on this, which is Happy New Year. I wish that you quit vibe coding for serious software. Thank you, Koshik. This has been my argument for the last 3 years. This is a really big deal for him to come out and say this, because he's not the kind of person to make extreme statements. He's a very reserved professor. He's super intellectual, and he must be extremely frustrated and angry that this is happening. Probably they lost something that is if I were to speculate, somewhat catastrophic, and they are really set back by this. And if they're not wildly set back by it, they're at least very frustrated that this happened, because it's not a fault of their own. That they're trying to embrace this new technology. They're trying to be good citizens and give it a chance. And they're being paid back with this thing not supporting such basic freaking technology that text editors from the 1970s can do this reliably. Control S, and it works. And our new super AI systems of the future can't do this. Something's fundamentally wrong. So, Jeters, let's go out and fix it.